Good morning, or it's morning for me. Good afternoon if you're watching this later. I am sorry that this is taking so long to get to you. Yesterday, I had a Zoom meeting with Soch 300 and needed about 3 hours to recover from it because the students, things are so hard for them. And um, I can only imagine that they're hard for you. And so I don't know whether this class is a good distraction from how things are going, or uh, a really annoying distraction from other things that are really important, like rent and food and relatives who are sick. I don't know. Um, they mentioned the isolation, they mentioned lethargy, they mentioned lack of productivity and not caring. Of course, they're graduating seniors. They feel like graduation has been stolen from them. They understand the pandemic, but like, why can't we graduate in August? Walk in August. They're invited to your graduation in December. Um, they're worried about money. They've got this internship. Some internships are dead and gone, and will they get credit hours? You guys have different worries, but I can only imagine that you have worries just like they do, though yours are other worries, overlapping, not totally the same. So I've decided, good or bad, to use as many examples from the pandemic as possible to make this research as relevant to your lives as I can. As I said yesterday, sociology has contributed a great deal to uh, public health. And the other major contribution would be from medicine. Um, there are other disciplines that have contributed, like political science, because public health is public, meaning government should be involved. Um, and without any other comment, you can see how our government's actions at many levels do or don't have an impact on the spread of the coronavirus. So, sociology's contribution to social interaction, social networks, very important in epidemiology and how diseases spread, collective behavior in preventing their spread, government behavior, etc. Please tell me when I open the forum that using the pandemic as an example, was really useful, or it was not good and upsetting, and how did it go? Let me know. Just be honest. Um, the other thing in the forum is, please let me know who you are. Yes, the forum is anonymizing people, and I don't know how to change that. I might try to unanonymize you, but maybe you feel safer anonymous in posting. So if you want, you can say, hey, this is, and put your name, and then post whatever you want. Okay, so how to theory, remember, theory is built from concepts, and research relate. How do you relate concepts to research? How do you collect the right kind of data? And this goes differently deductively or inductively. It depends on whether you're a deductive positivist researcher or an inductive qualitative researcher. So that's it. It depends. And I'm going to present both of them. And in fact, some of what I'm presenting now will be from the reading next Monday. You won't read about grounded theory right now. So I'm doing you a little bit of a favor, jumping the gun, telling you about it, lecturing from the reading that is on Monday. Like I said, I'm okay with that. We'll get back to that whole scheduling. Summary has to be due, then you get the lecture, then we talk about it. We'll do that next Monday, if that's working for you. Okay. So, standards. How do we have to have some sort of standards. That's what Schutt calls it in the textbook. We have to figure out, are we doing this right? And probably the main concept in research for standards, how do you know that you're doing this right, is validity. When statements about empirical reality are correct. Yes, someone is sick with the coronavirus. No, someone is not. They have a head cold. So the three classic, it's become classic symptoms are dry cough, bad dry cough, fever, pneumonia. And, shortness of breath. Not pneumonia is a physical process. Shortness of breath is a symptom. So fever, cough, shortness of breath, those are the symptoms. So do they have the coronavirus? Well, is your research valid because you managed to distinguish between those who have it and those who don't? Yes, this is how it spreads. That's another thing you'd want to be sure of. You're getting valid results when you're trying to figure out how it spreads, which is much more sociological. Measurement validity. Okay, that's the first consequence of trying to do valid research. It measures what we think it measures. And is this easy? No, not necessarily. As the reading says, you need clear definitions. Otherwise, you literally don't know what you're talking about. And you're trying to turn your definitions into measures. So one thing would be, okay, they have the three symptoms. Shortness of breath, dry cough, you're not coughing up gunk, and fever. You've got to count those people. But also a number could be number of people tested and positive versus number of people with symptoms. Number of people who've died from it, which so far is nice and low. You're thinking, yeah, it could be lower. Yes, it could. Yes, that'd be very nice, wouldn't it? But that's why we're all hunkering down inside our homes, because it's way higher than the flu. So this fall, to get off the example topic for a minute, traffic stops. Are you going to use bicycles? Cops are on bicycles. And they stop other people on bicycles. They stop people who are just walking. Do you include those as traffic stops? Could racism happen during a bicycle traffic stop? Well, yeah. So do you include them? Sounds silly, except then you bring in white cops stopping black young men just walking. Then maybe you'd want to know. So measurement validity. What do you measure? How do you measure? What do you include in traffic stops? What do you include in residential segregation? That's measuring. How do you measure level of racial or ethnic integration in a neighborhood versus racial or ethnic segregation? Those are questions in terms of measurement validity. Are you actually measuring what you say you're trying to measure? So causal validity. How do we know what we know? The classic question for this class, epistemology. How do you know what you know? And do you know what causes what? So how do we know this particular virus causes these symptoms? How do you know these particular measures prevent transmission from person to person? That's a more social issue. This particular virus causing these symptoms, that's medical, that's not sociology. People giving it to each other, that's sociology. So how do we know that it's not mostly airborne? Yes, you hang out really close to someone. You breathe the air they breathe. Yeah, you could get it. But mostly it's they sneeze, they cough, droplets, that gets on surfaces. You touch the surfaces, you touch your face. How do we know that's the causal sequence? Is that valid? Once we've come to a conclusion, are our conclusions valid? Another one, generalizability. This is important because it's international. So sample to population. Again, we'll get to sampling. The most important thing to know is a sample is not the whole population. You do a poll, political poll, you like Trump, you like Biden, you like Sanders, you like Warren, you wish the Republicans had somebody besides Trump, like William Wald. I know none of you have heard of him because he sank without a trace. But you do a political poll. You don't call all 150 million American voters. Well, more like 130. You call a sample of like 1,000 people. You don't call everybody who's going to vote. So can you conclude from your sample that this is true of the population? I'm giving that ahead of time, but that's what generalizability is about. That's one form of generalizability. And that's the one you're always thinking about first, because you almost never have the whole population. You don't have measures of the whole population. You have a measure of a sample. The other one is, you've got sample to population generalizability. You're pretty sure that what you found in your sample is true in the population. Is going to apply to a different population. So the coronavirus started in the region of Wuhan, China, and the authorities there think that it started in a particular market. They know the exact market they think where it started. That was not grammatical, too bad. And they implemented really severe measures in the entire region around that. And their incidence rate of the coronavirus is going down, and the death rate is now going down. The death rate has peaked. People are still dying of it, but fewer each day are dying of it. And they're opening up regions of China again. So, first of all, will it spread the same way in the US? That's population to population. Second, will the measures, the containment measures, work the same? They're a communist dictatorship. There's a certain amount of freedom, but the Chinese Communist Party runs things. And they can just lock people down and deploy the army, and if you leave, you could get arrested or shot. So you stay in your home. You need a pass to go to the grocery store. You need to show those papers. Here, way harder. It feels like that to some libertarians when Governor Pritzker says, stay in your homes, except to go to the grocery store. But, we're a different society. We have a wannabe authoritarian who's president, not an actual one yet. So what can we get away with in terms of keeping people in their homes, keeping it from being transmitted? Will this fall conclusions about Illinois State University sociology majors, apply to sociology majors at the U of I, at Bradley, at Millikan, at University of California, at Amherst, University of Massachusetts, Amherst. That's the other form of generalizability, to get off the coronavirus for a moment. Now, when you're doing more qualitative research, you don't focus on validity, you focus on authenticity. What the subjects understand, meaning the people you research. Once you start researching, you're researching people, because people, sociology, you call them research subjects. How do people understand the pandemic? Do they understand the symptoms? Do they understand the means of transmission? Do they understand the preventive measures? Right now in the United States, political polls, again, sampling, not the whole country, are showing that many more Republicans regard this whole thing as a hoax or as quite unimportant. More Democrats are taking it much more seriously. There are Democrats who don't, but most do, and most Republicans don't. That's shifting over time as it spreads, but they understand it politically. So if you were to research them in your get-up and your hand-washing, and they're laughing at you because they're Republicans, and they don't believe in it, there really are still quite a few spots around the country. That keeps going down, but there really are people who would laugh at you and say, oh yeah, liberal hoax, you're self-owning. They you are trying to get an accurate rendition of their thoughts, their attitudes. You're not trying to judge them. This is really hard. Um, Last semester, Richard Sullivan, I think, and Aaron Pitlock taught out of Arlie Hochschild's most recent book, um, Strangers in Their Own Land. I think that's what it was. And, she's a Berkeley liberal. She's at the University of California, Berkeley, um, professor of sociology, and a really distinguished career. And she spent 5 years in Louisiana well before Trump's election, trying to understand conservatives. And she tried to represent their beliefs accurately, being fair to what they said, not only not judging it, but not mischaracterizing it, really trying to speak for them accurately. That's what you want to do as a qualitative researcher. You want to get an authentic rendition of what your subjects think. That's the goal. Man, 11 minutes for one screen. Great. Oh well. Um, Sorry. So you're turning a theory into research, or you're turning just a hypothesis into research. You're dealing with concepts. And the reading, again, has concept is a mental image summarizing observations, ideas, images. And I've said I don't like that. And the one I prefer is mental representation allowing categorization of phenomena. Phenomena meaning people, interactions, stuff. Um, that's the one I prefer. Again, I'm just going to go over it again. Things are present, they're in front of you, you're watching people talk, you're watching people interact with each other. Then you go away and you re-present it. It is present again in your mind. They're not in front of you right now. That was in the past, even 10 minutes in the past. You walk away, you walk down the street, you think about that conversation those two people had. You are re-presenting it to yourself. So a concept is a way to represent things in the world. A book. If I say book, that's a word that stands for something in your head. You might be sitting where you can look at a whole bookshelf. I am in my basement. You may not be, but then it's in your head what a book is. Concepts are debated in specific fields. Conceptualization is, I say here, harder than it looks, because it is. How do you define, well, all sorts of things? I mean, just because most academics say racism is not possible for the oppressed doesn't necessarily mean that that's true. People will disagree. You've been told that by sociology professors. The sociology professors believe it. People in anthropology, pretty much anybody who studies it, shows at some point, look, it's systemic against particular racial groups. That's what we mean by racism. That's not, once you get out of academia, that's not what it is. And how do you explain when people act consistently, say black people act consistently against white people? There are a few. Nearly every sociologist would say, well, yeah, there's a reason for that. But how do you explain that phenomenon? What concept do you use? You don't, according to us, use racism. You use prejudice. People, individual people can be prejudiced, but racism is a system-wide phenomenon. See, those are two concepts, racism versus prejudice. And people are going to debate them. People are going to disagree. How does Eduardo Bonilla Silva, I've asked this before, I'll ask it again, get away with saying there's racism without racists? Well, one of the pillars of his thought is it's systemic, not just requiring individual people to carry it out. Everywhere you go, every institution, police, education, housing, government, you run into these deep assumptions about different races, and it disadvantages one group or several groups and advantages one group. So people debate concepts quite a bit. Doesn't matter what field you're in. You must know prior research, the literature. That's why you're doing your exam 2. That's why you did exam 2 and why you will be doing exam 3. Because paradigms rest on concepts, and then as they are used in research, paradigms influence concepts. So another example would be, more to the point, epidemic versus pandemic. And I looked online, and they said there's no really good distinction between the two. An epidemic means many people with an illness in an area. How big is the area? Pandemic, that's more general. And the World Health Organization, WHO, has declared this a pandemic, or a global pandemic, to be really clear. Demic comes from demos, which is Greek for people. So pandemic means across people, meaning everywhere. But the boundaries are blurry between epidemic and pandemic. Those are concepts. How do you conceptualize the spread of a disease? So words like that, which they call up concepts in your head, are important to define, and they're difficult to define. So if we're going to pay attention to what I said at the very beginning on the first slide, how do you turn concepts into research? The deductive approach does exactly that in that sequence. You turn concepts into research. You have an idea. You have concepts that help you develop an explanation. This is how pandemics work. This is how racism works. This is how education works. Being a sociology major, these are the influences. And you have to use concepts to understand those influences on success or failure in a sociology program. Then the second step is to test with data. So really what you're doing is, I have an idea. Let's see if it's right. But first you have the idea, then you go see if it's right. That's the bottom line. I have an idea. Let's see if it's right. Everything else is detail. So let's get into the details. You want to do this formally. You don't want to screw it up. So again, Schutt has a definition of operationalization, connecting concepts to measurement operations. I don't like the word connecting. I like turning concepts into specific measurements of reality. I like that one a lot more. You are modifying a concept to measure it. That's what you're really trying to do. You are trying to measure the number of people with coronavirus, COVID-19. You're trying to measure the number of people influenced, shaped, hurt by racism. You're trying to measure the number of sociology majors who declare the major, who stay in the major, who graduate in the major, who leave the major. You've got to measure that. And you're specifically operationalizing, turning a concept into a measurement, independent and dependent variables. You're explicitly dealing with a hypothesis. Hey, I have an idea. Let's find out. Well, your idea is a hypothesis. X causes Y. And so you have to operationalize your independent variable, the cause, and you have to operationalize your dependent variable, the effect. And a variable is something that varies. It changes. It gets bigger. It gets smaller. Remember, you're measuring. And it can get bigger and smaller on a Likert scale when you're doing a survey. On a scale of 1 to 5, what do you feel? We're going to get into that on Monday, nominal ordinal interval ratio. Definitely be ready for questions. I think I do a good job explaining that. But you're trying to turn a mental state into a number. And so let's say that's a dependent variable, your mental or emotional state. How do you feel? And that's an effect of when people tell you X, how do you feel? Okay, X is the cause. They tell you X. You got to turn that into a number too. And then how do you feel? That's the dependent variable. That's the effect. They say mean things to me, I feel badly. That's a causal statement. You want to measure that. I hope that makes sense. How do you measure social isolation? How do you measure social distancing? How do you measure 6 feet? We're all supposed to stay away from each other by 6 feet. I think the average person is trying to do 6 feet plus because we're not really sure what 6 feet is. I mean, do you carry a yardstick around with you and say, okay, 2 of these, stay 2 of these away? If you're in Canada, it's 2 meters, meter stick. So 6 feet plus like 6+ inches. How do you, that gets into measurement. Which measuring system are you going to use? We generally don't think about measuring systems, and that's a tangent. And I'm going to shut up now and move on. But how do you measure social distancing? If you're walking by somebody in the grocery store, because the aisles are about 6 feet wide, maybe 5.5 feet wide, you're breathing one breath of their air by walking by them about 6 inches to a foot away from each other. Do you just avoid going down that aisle until they're done? How do you know you're doing social distancing properly? Is it number of people you see per day? I mean, if that goes to 0, you're in your house, you see your family, you don't count them because you're all stuck in the same house and not leaving. Then finally, when he gets groceries, and okay, the number goes up to 1. Another question would be, how do you turn concepts into variables? No, that's the same question. Other example would be symptoms versus testing, which is not happening nearly as much as it should, versus deaths. I mean, that's pretty obvious that somebody's dead. But how do you know what caused their death? Is it because they had the symptoms, or is it because they tested positive? So your independent variable is symptoms, or your independent variable is the test. Your dependent variable is the actual death. So that's operationalization is really, really difficult. And the examples from the reading, to get back to normal life for a second, which, by the way, will happen. You've got to keep hanging on to that this may last weeks or months, but it's going to happen. We will get back to regular life. Binge drinking. How do you know when somebody's binge drinking? This is something that when I teach this class and students are allowed to do their own projects, I think now 3 times in a row somebody's done binge drinking as a proposal. And they use the standard definition because male and female metabolisms are different. So women, like 4 drinks so many ounces of alcohol per hour. That's 4 and 5 units, 5 drinks, 5 beers, 5 martinis, 5 whatever, 5 shots per hour for males. That tends to be a standard one, but is that really good? Not really sure. Social status, even more difficult. How do you measure social status? Well, in intro to social textbooks, they tend to give examples of professions like professor, doctor, prostitute at the other, and they'll assign number values and ask individuals, what do you think? They'll do a survey of what people think of different professions. But turning social status into a measure is really hard. It's a very abstract concept, whereas binge drinking, like you're holding a drink in your hand, it's pretty concrete. Putting alcohol into your body, very concrete. Social status, very abstract. Okay. This deductive process may be helpful. You're moving from abstract concepts, assumptions, to a theory, a set of propositions from those assumptions. And usually when you're doing a research project, you're testing one hypothesis. So I've said in class, before we all had to scatter, that people will test multiple hypotheses per paper. But often, especially when you're a beginner, you just test one hypothesis or maybe two. And then conceptualization is making it more concrete, like binge drinking. What is that? Okay, it's number of drinks per hour in the male body or in the female body. You're defining the concepts and then you're measuring them. I got ahead of myself. That's, operationalization is this 4 versus 5 for binge drinking. Then you're actually going out. How do you know at a party when somebody is actually binge drinking? Are you sitting there with a little pad and paper and your little clipboard? If you're an epidemiologist, are you wearing a white coat with a clipboard and a pen at a party? Come on. So that's another problem, that actually measuring is really hard. Self-reporting. Oh yeah, I had 5 beers, man. How do you know that? You were drunk. How do we trust self-reporting? So once you get to actually collecting the data, it gets even harder. This whole process is hard, and that gets even harder. And the metaphor is directional. It's a metaphor when we talk about abstract to concrete. It's higher ideas, higher concepts are abstract, and lower ideas are concrete and like the next step from talking about a drink is the actual drink in your hand. So think of this as a process of abstraction to concreteness. Now, the other way, remember I said at the beginning, it depends. Here's the other way. Instead of, hey, I have an idea, let's go find out if I'm right, it works the other way around. You say, I have no idea. Let's get some data and come up with an idea. That's induction. You start with, I have no idea, and you go get some data. And I would say that nothing is purely inductive because you are using your concepts to limit what you're studying. So in the case of binge drinking, your concepts, first of all, have to be drinking. And second, let's say how this worked. I mean, I don't know how the field worked, but for instance, it might have worked by researchers who are professors who, remember, went to college, thinking back and then hearing about their students, think about their own experiences, thinking about what their students are doing, and then saying, oh, they drink. How do they drink? Let's go to a party. Can I look like a kid and go to a party? Can I get my undergrads to go to a party? And then we notice how people drink differently. They drink more, they drink less. And it, over time, evolves the concept of binge drinking. I don't know if that's how it worked. That's one way it could have worked. But first you just collect the data, then you're conceptualizing. And then you collect more data, and then you develop an explanation. Oh, why do you binge drink? Social pressure. You always wanted to, and mom and dad are no longer controlling you because you're at college. Those are explanations. See, that's after 2 or 3 research processes of watching people drink. So one example of the inductive approach is grounded theory, which you will read on Monday. But there are many ways. Maria Schmeckley really wanted me to point that out to you guys because she does it differently. I'll mention that again. One of the really important ideas in grounded theory as a research approach, it's really frustrating to me that they call it grounded theory because I think they should call it grounded theorization. It's a process of analyzing data. You develop a theory that is grounded in the data. But one of their debates is, should we even do a literature review? Like when you are trying to understand student drinking, You just go to parties and start understanding student drinking by seeing it, and you develop your own theory afresh. You don't look at the literature. And other people, even in grounded theory, say, okay, that's nuts. You can still do inductive research, but you should know what other people have already found. Again, don't reinvent the wheel. Don't redo someone else's research when 20 years of research have shown we pretty much got a handle on this. Go after a new question. So that's a debate in grounded theory. Should you even do a literature review? Because if you do a literature review, you are getting preconceived ideas. Anyway, the process is C, constant comparison of each datum. You see somebody drink, you see somebody chug. You know, they're paying homage to Toby Keith, and they got their red Solo cup, and they fill it with beer, and they drink it down in one set of gulps. And then they have it again from the keg. I don't know if you guys do keggers. My understanding is you tend not to. Big in the 70s when I was a teenager. Yes, I stopped drinking when I was 21. Explain that. So a datum would be somebody chugged a full red Solo cup of beer. And you're comparing that datum, and you're comparing other data. You notice somebody else, she's just holding her cup. It's full of beer. You've been watching her the whole time. 20 minutes later, it's full of beer. And man, she's skating under the radar. She looks like she's a drinker, but in fact, she's not. That's interesting. You're thinking about the data as you collect it. You say, that's interesting. And you come up with this phrase, skating under the radar. So we will get to that on section 4. Data collection and data analysis are often simultaneous. Okay. I'm coming up on 38 minutes, and so I'm going to try to wrap this up pretty soon. The key analytic strategy, which is on the next screen, is coding. And coding is applying a label to a datum. And so the classic way to do this is open coding. You go line by line. And if this is your notes, your participant observation notes, you go line by line in your own notes. And what is that? But classically, it's applied to interviews. And you get a transcript, and you make sure your transcript is really good. That's very important. You get a transcript of your interview, and you go line by line, really, word by word, line by line. And if you see a concept jump out at you, you apply that tag. You say, somebody talked about their drinking, and you apply binge drinking, or you apply flying under the radar, you apply whatever concept occurs to you, line by line. So you then end up with a text full of tags like this, conceptual tags. The second step, once you're done going through the entire interview, and yes, it is as tedious as it sounds. Oh my God. Selective coding means you look at all your concepts and you start grouping them. Oh, these go with these. I didn't notice that. And you look at like 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 transcripts, depending on if you're an undergrad or a master's or PhD. If you're doing PhD, you might have 40 interviews. If you're an undergrad, you can have like 4 or 5. Because you're beginners, you're just getting going. Why overwhelm you? So with selective coding, that's the second step. You've got tags all over every one of your interviews. You now look at the tags and you start grouping them. And then finally, you start looking at how the grouped tags, which will give you another concept. So you have like 10 different tags that are similar, and you have this new second level concept. Then how do the second level concepts relate? That's theoretical coding. So here's a sort of, I don't know, diagram. And the metaphor is upward. You start with concrete data, what somebody says, and then you move toward more abstract. So at the top right, theoretical coding is the most abstract. You're looking at relationships between secondary or selective coding, the results of selective coding, secondary concepts and how they relate to each other. Okay. This was really important, and I think I'm done. Yeah, 40 minutes. I've got another page. I'm going to delete it. We'll talk about that later. It's not necessary. It was about all these data sources that Schutt mentioned in the reading. You know what? We'll get to that in section 4. Not all constructionists are inductive. And I was talking to Jason Witzel in our department who does very qualitative, very constructionist data. Excuse me. Sorry. He said there are plenty of people who are constructionists who do somewhat deductive research because, sorry, there's a vacuum above me going on. Are concepts like queer generalizable? Can you talk about queerness in Iran? Can you talk about it in China? Can you talk about it in Africa? Does that concept travel and help you understand how people are living their lives, how they feel about themselves, who they're attracted to? So it's worth thinking in terms of constructionism and deduction. They tend not to go together, but you do want to know if a concept will travel because it helps you understand social phenomena. Remember Latin plurals? Phenomenon is singular, phenomena is plural. And this F is Maria Schmeckley's point. Many qualitative researchers do not use grounded theory. She uses MaxQDA, which is a computer program. So it's capital letters, MaxQDA, which means, I guess, maximum qualitative data analysis. I think it's put out by a German firm, and they've been doing it for like 20 years, and it's like the leading qualitative data analysis program in the field. Maria loves it. It works really well, she says, because your transcript tags can be used in a sort of supercharged, computerized way. And so she doesn't use grounded theory. She uses MaxQDA, which is a different approach. I don't know that it gives her different results, but she loves it. So it's much more complex than grounded theory. And my own dissertation was qualitative, and I just collected, I've gone through bicycle magazines over and over and over for years and years and years, and other published matter and archives, and I just wrote outlines because I was writing a chronology. I was writing a sequential, this happened, then this happened, then this happened, and here's why this is significant for the market, the bicycle market. So I wrote an outline, but I did something that was somewhat like coding. It wasn't the same, but I did have to sort of tag particular things so that then I could write my outline and I had different sets of computer files to do it. So point F is important. There are lots of different ways to do this. Okay, 43 minutes. Last one was 37 or 39. I'm done. I'm going to get this to you. It's 12:08. I'm sorry it's late. And I'm going to open the forum around 10 to 1 because that's when the first of you will be able to see it. The experience of my Social 300 students, as I said, really threw me off. That was from 3:30 to 5 yesterday, and I'm just thinking about how you guys are doing. You can certainly start a conversation in the forums about how you're doing, and you can talk to each other as well as talking to me. Please make that one conversation. All the others can be questions about what I've just said, and I'll see you on the forums.